Hello, so this is just for feeding the starter. I took it out of the fridge a few minutes ago so it could kind of come to temperature. It's really healthy still. I don't even need to worry about the hooch or anything like that. It hasn't been that long since I made some bread. So first, I do the French method of, I don't know how to say it, mise en place, which is cooking in place, everything together. I have everything I need. I've got my water, flour, bowl I'm gonna put it in, discard bowl, utensils, and scale. And remember that however much starter you're feeding, you're going to have to use, that much bread or that much water, that much flour. If I want to have a whole bunch of starter, like I'm giving starter to people or I'm making a bunch of loaves of bread, I might just feed this whole thing. But since I'm just going to be making a couple loaves, I'm going to do half of it maybe. The feeding part, it doesn't need to be super specific how much starter you use. You just need to make sure you use the same amount of water and flour, a 1-to-1 with the water and flour. And I'm doing kilograms. So just kind of give it a stir to make sure you're using the good part of it and not just water on top. I'm gonna dollop some of that in there. So I'm at 60. And the rest of this, I'm just gonna put in this dish here. This will be my extra. And this is good too, like if I happen to mess this guy up, I have this that I can feed and start over with. But usually it's fine. And while it's feeding, I can take the opportunity to rinse out my crock to put my starter back in it and go back in the fridge. But this will likely be my discard as long as everything goes right with this. All right, so we're at 60 and I'm gonna do like a 1 to 2 to 2 ratio about. So I'll do 60 of starter, 120 of water, 120 of flour. So tare, get back to 0, 120 water. Of water. That's fine. Give it a stir. And you can tell how happy it is because there's bubbles already. And it's not just bubbles from me stirring it. It's effervescent because it's a happy colony there. All right. Back and tear. And if you're going to err on the measuring side, do it on the side of water. Like you'll want to go with slightly less flour. You never want slightly less water, if that makes sense. You don't want to make bread at this point. All right, so I want 120 of flour. Move this over here so you can kind of see. I like to kind of fluff it in the bag so that the flour is nice and loose. Not a huge deal, it just makes it a little bit easier for me to get it to dissolve. And I went 140. So I need to add plenty of water. There we go. And this process is much easier when you're not trying to talk. So got a little bit of starter on there. That'll be fine. So you dissolve your flour. All right, and you can see it's dissolved pretty good. Not a lot of chunks and not a lot of loose water. We're gonna cover this guy up and check on it every hour or so, and we want it to be bubbled up, almost doubled, and you'll see that it'll be like light and fluffy, light and airy, I should say. All right, I'll see you when it's ready.
6 hours later.
All right. This guy is nice and bubbly and stretchy. Ready to go. If you ever wonder, there are videos you can watch online like how to do the float test to see if it's ready, but after you've done it a few times, you'll be able to tell. It's nice and airy. So at this point, I'm going to just put the starter that I want to save to the side back in the fridge. And for our purposes tonight, I'm just going to put everything back in the fridge and we'll start doing the levain tomorrow morning. The nice thing about sourdough is that basically at any time, if you don't have time to finish what you're doing, you can just pop it in the fridge and you've got a day or two before you even need to get back to it. Oh, I've got that much sourdough starter in there. That'll be just fine. Some people save less, some people save more. Now, you can see this was the discard and it's still quite active. For it to be a true discard for your recipes, you'll want it to flatten out and even separate a little bit with a little bit of liquid on top. Because at this point, if you try to make crackers out of this, it's gonna puff up, get all spongy. That's not really what you want. So if you're using a recipe with a true discard, you'll want it to be flatter than this. And once it flattens to the right consistency, basically, you'll just put it in the fridge and it'll keep there for a few weeks, and you have some time to find some recipes for it. Now, I'm going to put this back in the fridge, and this is what we'll use for the levain tomorrow morning. And I should also mention that my sourdough starter was in such good health that I didn't even need to feed it. I could have skipped straight to making the levain, but wanted to show you how to do it. So I'm gonna pop these two guys in the fridge, leave this out probably until I go to bed, and it goes in the fridge too. All right, we're gonna make our levain today. And I don't even know if that's how you say it. My brain says leaven, but I read levain. Took this out of the fridge a few minutes ago so it could kind of come to temperature. if you're not in a hurry, it's not a big deal. The recipe calls for 10 starter, 25 water, and 25 flour. But it's really healthy and I want this to go a little faster, so I'm going to do more like 20, 25, 25. So we've got, I'm going to make 2 loaves of bread today, but I've got my jar, rubber band to mark where it starts, little cloth to cover the lid, water, flour, starter. Alright, let's try that out. So we're going for 25 if we can, or 20 if we can. It doesn't go easy sometimes. It does its own thing. 27, close enough. Let's zero that guy out. So we're going to do 25. And I find that the flour is a little harder to control than the water, so I'll use a separate deal for the flour today. All right. So we've got our water and starter. Mix that up really good to get it excited and help it dissolve a little bit better, and it'll feed more evenly on the water and the flour that way. You can tell it's already super excited about this. This should go pretty good. My kitchen's pretty cool. If your kitchen is warmer, it won't take as long as mine. It usually takes 4 to 7 hours for it to come to its full state of activity. It'll probably grow about double. And again, like when we fed it, it'll be nice and stringy and full. So we mark where we start, so we kind of know where our goal is. Alright, we'll set that aside and I'll check it in 4 hours. All right, we are going to start making a loaf of sourdough bread. You can see how fluffy and fizzy and happy the starter is, so it is good to go. Now with your sourdough actual recipes, you can't really flub the ingredients like you can when you're feeding it. Okay, so for the loaf, we've got our starter. We're gonna do 50 grams of starter, 350 of water, 500 of bread flour, and I pre-measured, it just makes it easier for myself. 10 grams of sea salt. Don't ever skip the sea salt. It aids in the fermentation process as well as other things. You never want to put salt in with your starter because it will eventually kill the colony, but you definitely need it for your bread. Okay, anyway, we're going to do 50 of starter. And if I get too much, I'll just have to pull it out because it's a pretty particular recipe. So I've got 60. There we go. Then let's zero it out. We're gonna do 350 of water. It's like an ASMR water pouring. So close. One more. There we go. And like with the other ones, you want to stir it up and get it more evenly distributed and dissolved. You'll notice that different bakers do it different ways. Some people like to put their salt in the water first. I prefer to do the starter, the water, the flour, and then sprinkle the salt on the top. But, you know, different schools of thought. And you'll find your own way of doing things, and it's fine. Like you never use metal bowls because it makes the colony sad. And I don't even use metal utensils, but then the first video you'll watch, they'll be using metal utensils, you know. And the flour, I don't use a sifter or anything, but I do fluff it in the bag and then fluff it when I put it in the bowl. And we'll work that in a little bit. And some bakers, even at this step, they prefer to go in it with their hands. This step, it's just a little too messy for my liking, so I do use a hard spatula. All right, so we're not really very mixed. I'm gonna get my salt in there. Make sure everything is distributed. And the description of this step is they want you to bring it together until it looks like a shaggy mess. And I always thought that was funny. And it's the perfect description for what you're going for. You do want to make sure that there's no clumps of dry flour or places that are too watery. You see there's still water at the bottom, flour on the other side. The thing about sourdough though is you don't want to put it in like a bread maker, a mixer, a blender, because it'll increase the gluten levels. And part of the reason why people like sourdough so much is that it's lower in gluten because it hasn't been interfered with so much. All right, I would say that's a shaggy mess. Now, at this point, we're just going to cover it and let it rest for an hour. Then we'll start our first series of stretch and folds.
1 hour later.
All right, we're gonna do our first series of stretch and folds. My husband calls them bends and snaps. Have a little thing of water to wet the fingertips, helps keep it from sticking. You can see no change from before. You don't have to use the water, but I do find that it helps quite a bit. Now the idea is you only do a quarter of a turn or an eighth of a turn and work your way around the bowl. This first time, you'll notice you're not getting a great structure on the bread yet, but that'll come. You'll want to do at least 2 more of these if you have the time. I usually stop at 3, including this one. Looking good. It doesn't quite look like a loaf yet, but it's not a shaggy mess anymore. So let's say we're good to go for now. We'll just cover that back up and come back to it in 20 to 30 minutes. 30 minutes is usually good for me. It kind of depends on how warm or cool your house is. See you in 30. We're ready for our second set of stretch and folds. Kind of a mess. It gets easier every time. Looks a little bit more and more bread-like every time. See what a nice, tight little ball it's turning into now. I'm sure there are seasoned bakers out there cringing at the way I do this, but everybody does their own thing. I always like to give one little extra fold over the top and keep it together. So, looking pretty good. Cover that back up. And give it another 20 to 30 minutes and we'll do our last series of stretch and folds. Okay, this is, if everything goes well, our last series of stretch and folds. We can always do another one if we don't quite like the structure, but I bet you'll find that it's going to look just great. When we're done with this, we'll leave it to do what we call a bulk ferment. And I usually just leave it on the counter overnight, 7 to 10 hours. If your counter is warm, you might consider putting it in the fridge overnight and then letting it finish its proof the next morning. I really like doing winter proofs, a long, cool proving process of 10 or 12 hours. Gets a nice crispy crust to it, I guess. But it's summer, so we're warm, and we only want it to double by 50%, grow 50%, and it'll have kind of bubbles around the side. We'll see what it looks like tomorrow, but you don't want to overprove it. If it gets too big, it'll probably flatten out in the oven. And the reason I like to do at least 3 stretch and folds is that it helps with the oven spring. That means when you put it in the oven, it grows even more. Now you can see the dough is nice and smooth and kind of shiny. That is what we're looking for. If you want to up your sourdough game, you can get a Bane, a special sourdough basket to prove it in overnight. But the bowl works just fine for me. And I like to prove it shiny side up. If it's dry in your house, you can give it a little extra water on top. Not necessary. But it's ready to go. You can see that it's looking more like a sourdough should. We will come back to this in 10 hours, 7 to 10 hours. I'll check it first thing in the morning. Our bulk prove is over, and you can see that there are lots of nice bubbles, especially around the edges. And it's risen by at least 50%. If you let it overprove, it'll get big and then fall in the oven. The best thing to do if it's more than doubled is just look up a recipe for focaccia bread or for pizza crust, which I have done before, but this looks good. These sourdough mistakes that I've made have just been the best tasting mistakes. And it's kind of sourdough lore that you're not a real baker until you've had at least one failure. So I guess that makes me a real baker because I've had several. What I'm doing now is, since I'm not using the basket, it kind of sticks to the bowl. And I'm going to turn it out onto a floured surface. And I'm going to shape it for a bread loaf pan. I have a second loaf that I'll shape for the Dutch oven for a traditional sourdough bread look. And I'll demonstrate how to bake both of these. But the shaping is the same on each, so. Beautiful. So we've got a light, airy dough. We don't want to knock all the air out. We just want to kind of give it a nice shape and get it nice and smooth on the top. So water for the stretch and folds, flour for the bake. That's a pretty good loaf shape. I pre-cut to fit a little bit better my parchment paper because with these edges, it tends to bake the paper into it. So I do trim it down and flour it and make sure it fits a little bit better so it doesn't cook the paper into it. Now I'm going to cover this guy And in about 10 minutes, I'll start preheating the oven. You will put the Dutch oven in the oven to preheat, but this stays out until the time. So once it's preheated in 10 minutes, it'll be about 30 minutes, and this should rise by 20-25%, so just a little bit. All right, the oven is preheated to, 450? Yes, 450. And we're about ready to put everything in the oven. I'm going to explain what I'm doing and then not talk because I don't want to burn myself like on the Dutch oven. There are much better tools than just this silly razor out there. And I do recommend getting an actual tool for scoring. You do need to score your bread. I do the loaf at 2 diagonals, and I do the round one just with 1 straight line. But there are so many. This is where you can decide, like, do you want to dust it with flour and do the nice curve with the wheat designs and, make a really beautiful traditional looking loaf. And this is your time to do it. The bake time is, the instructions say 20 minutes with the lids on and then 25 to 30 with them off. But I've had better success with 25 on and 25 off. And of course, since the loaf pan doesn't have a lid, we'll just use a foil tent, and that's easy to pull off when we hit the 25 minutes. So let's get rolling. It's so pretty, and don't worry about if it's sticking on the edges or anything like that. It's not too wet on top, so I'm not going to worry about dusting it. And we're going to eat this right away. We're going to make grilled cheese sandwiches tonight, so. It's about time for me to get a new razor. And if you don't score it deep enough, just go back over it. If you ever forget to score it, you will find out why you do score it, because it's going to rise and split, and the scoring is so that you decide where it gets to split. Otherwise, it'll just out the side, which is fine. It'll taste the same. It just won't look quite as pretty. All right, that guy's ready. Here's my round one. You can see I just had it on parchment paper and transferred it back into the bowl for the final prove. Do a nice deep score on this one. Right, Dutch oven, out of the oven. Very carefully transfer this guy in, don't Don't touch the Dutch oven, it is angry. Put it on, back in the oven. 25 minutes, and I'm not going to worry about showing you how to take a lid off. You can figure that part out, but I will check back with you when it's time for cooling. All right, moment of truth. Just pulled these out of the oven, looking great. This loaf got a little darker than I like, and this loaf looks perfect. Let's pull this out. You do need to let your bread cool. Some people prefer to leave it in the open. I like to cover it with a thin tea towel. I know the smell is killing you and you want to cut into it right away, but it will turn back to dough. It'll get really gummy and sticky. The steam needs to escape, so leave it to cool for at least 2 hours. It should be completely cool before you cut into it or you'll ruin it. Now, you can make several loaves at the same time and then slice them and put them in the freezer. They don't do very well when you refrigerate them, but they do great when you freeze them. And they still have all the health benefits of the fresh loaf. All right, so I'm gonna leave these guys to cool and try to distract myself for 2 hours.
One eternity later.